Welcome to Sex Talk Radio, a podcast that explores sex and kink through candid and curious conversation. Join me and expert guests in unpacking taboos and making sex talk more fun. Today's episode of Sex Talk Radio is sponsored by the HUD app. HUD is changing the face of casual dating by offering an alternative and empowered approach to commitment-free dating. Go to hudapp.com/sextalk, that's hudapp.com/SEGGS talk for a week on me. A quick note, the HUD app is available on both iOS and Android and is available to users 18 and over. Hi, Tomie. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good.
Welcome to Austin.
Thank you.
How are you liking it so far?
I'm really liking it. It's really quiet. I haven't been here that long yet. I just landed last night.
Yeah.
And it hasn't even been a full 24 hours yet, but love my hotel. Love how big everything is. Everything's just more spread out.
Yes.
It took me 15 minutes to get from gate D1 to D18, walking. I was this is insane.
So you're coming in from New York, right?
I'm coming in from Denver, actually, but
Okay.
I primarily am based out of New York. I've been traveling so much, though. I've only been in New York this month for 7 days.
Wow.
Yeah. What
And
am
have
I
you
paying the
been-
rent for? You know?
Have you been traveling for work mostly?
This month I have been traveling for work mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the day job, or want to tell me a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a Pro-Domme. I've been a Pro-Domme since 2019, and prior to that, I've been a lifestyle kinkster, general perverted person, and I also when I was starting Pro-Domming, I had a day job, and I still do consulting for on an ongoing basis. I like to keep both together.
Definitely. So the traveling you've been doing has been for Pro-Dom work?
Yes, it's been for Pro-Dom work. Denver was half. I was speaking at a training, actually.
Oh, what kind of training?
It was an anti-trafficking training. So I was there for one training to giving a training.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it has been
Yeah.
being my usual debaucherous self.
And so are you finding clients around the U.S., or they're finding you and they're flying you and paying you to come out? Or how do you kind of plan those trips, I guess, with all the travel?
Yeah, so it really depends. So I used to do more structured tours. This month, though, there's just a lot of activities. I was in Canada last week, actually. That was a client flying me out for a day. I ended up
Wow.
staying 2 days, though. And I was in Amsterdam for XBiz, but there were subs there.
Yeah.
London was for a client.
There were subs there?
In Amsterdam? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have ongoing subs that are
They
there?
were new because I've never been to Amsterdam.
Okay, I see.
Yeah. And yeah, so there's just subs here and there everywhere. And I kind of
They are
flit
everywhere.
around depending
Yeah.
on how my schedule meshes together.
I love how you're kind of I don't know, I love that you get to explore and travel and monetize and make it work and play. And it sounds amazing.
Time of my life. I'm having
Fuck
the time of
yes.
my life. Yeah.
Fuck yes. I would love for you to, I kind of like to go through my guest's life, basically, and kind of weave together different things that happen in their life and how you came here and what you're creating now. Do you want to tell me a little bit about how you grew up and where you grew up and when you started exploring kink and
Yeah, absolutely.
jump in?
I grew up in Taiwan and moved to US when I was a little bit younger. And I feel like I've always been generally kinky. I've told this story a few times before, but
Yeah.
my first turn on was that scene in The Matrix where he was on his back and the metal bug was
Ooh.
going to his belly button.
Oh,
My memory of that
Whoa.
clip
yeah.
was when I was still in Taiwan, so I must have been younger than 8.
Uh-huh.
And that
It
was
was
my
erotic for you.
It was.
Yeah.
I think it was a penetrative act.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also another movie it's a drama that I watched in Taiwan. Don't remember the plot, don't remember where this is from, but there's a tornado inside a living room and a piece of wood flies out of the tornado and hits a woman in the forehead and she dies. And that
Whoa.
also was a memory that was sort of like erotic for me at a pretty young
Sure.
age.
So impact.
Impact, I think, forms of like,
Sadism.
yeah, sadism, like non-consensual penetration a little bit. That was at a pretty young age has always been
Wow.
there.
Yeah, the more guests I talk to, I think that there's something inherently taboo about like bringing up arousal in childhood. But almost every guest I talk to is like, yeah, like that was relevant for me. Like these specific turn-ons and experiences and rubbing against stuff, and it's like it all started at a very young age. People just don't talk about it necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think it was at the time. I don't know if it was erotic in the sense that I fully understand now. I
Right.
think it was it. I think it implanted itself in me and has been sort of like recurring. But it wasn't erotic in the sense I was like touching myself or like
Right.
exploring it.
But now in retrospect, we look back. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know either when I was like humping the noodle in the swimming pool. But
was
like,
that your start?
kind of when I discovered the clit. But like now in retrospect, I'm like, oh, that's what was happening at the time. But yeah, it's just interesting to talk to different guests, and they're like, yeah, I now realize that I was exploring these things at a very young age, prepubescent age, basically.
Yeah, and I didn't really explore kink or BDSM in a physical way really until college. And in college was when I started going out of my way to go to munches. Like for
In
a
college,
while,
wow,
yeah,
you're ahead of the game.
for a while I was talking to like anonymous people on different apps to talk about kink and BDSM, not even sexting. I was just so curious about it, and I want to hear about different people's stories and meet people from around the world and hear like, why are you into this? And I think I've always just had a like curiosity and like fascination about kink and really getting to see a person through that.
Yes, yes. I love trying to understand like the psychology of it, why people like the things they like, what turns them on, what provides them like surrender and relief. It's just like a really unique way to connect with someone.
Yeah. I'm sure you can relate to it.
Yes, yes. I find dating like kink forward, I'll call it. So on apps or when it's just all up front, I feel like the connection is so much deeper than holding off and waiting to explore that part of each other later. Not necessarily sleeping with each other right away, but just like I really like to ask questions and explore what people's kinks and desires are. So what was the first kind of event you went to, or the first in real life experience
The
you had?
first in real life experience was probably in like physically.
Yeah, I mean, the first time you went to a play party or saw a dungeon, or maybe some of the core memories that stick out to you. In
Yeah,
your
you know what's
exploration.
wild? I didn't step foot in a dungeon until I started pro-doming.
Okay.
And doing it professionally. Before that it was always in like people's homes, right? Like where people usually play. And one of the core memories I have about the dungeon is the first time holding a flogger and not knowing the sub really, because it was a like impact play party at the first dungeon that I was interested in Bushwick, and I ended up working there a little bit. And realizing like he's fully submitting, and there's like a sort of intensity in the fact that we don't quite know each other and that like mystery of it.
Sure.
And then seeing him submit anyway, that was very electrifying. Like the moment my flogger hit him and being like, wow.
And the trust.
The trust, yeah. And having all of these like friends and women around me playing with me. It was a really like fun night.
Totally.
Yeah, in hindsight now that I have gone to a lot more play parties, it wasn't the most well organized one, but like there was something about the messiness and how spontaneous it kind of came together.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful.
Totally. I feel like there's like an imprint with the first kind of play party or memory. Like there's just something really beautiful about it. Seeing everyone open up and like I'll never forget my first
What was your
experience.
first?
I've talked about it on here a little bit before. My friend Leola, who was on the podcast, she facilitated an event at my friend's house that wasn't actually a sex play party. It was shibari, and it was actually where I met the woman who tied me up last night, Azrael Blackwolf, who will be on the podcast next month. And they co-facilitated this shibari event where we were just kind of pairing up and doing exercises with each other. And it was very erotic, but they didn't want penetrative sex at the party, which was just a really cool, actually safe boundary for my first experience,
Right.
Of not feeling like pressured in any way. And it was just facilitated really, really well. And I love when facilitators or hosts kind of give like the rundown of how they do things and kind of like the boundaries and the communication they like in those settings. But yeah, it was just like one of those nights that I'll never forget.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really liked BDSM and kink too was also the ability to experience sexuality without penetrative acts.
Yes.
And
yes.
eroticizing barriers, right? Like I like latex because it's a way to feel a person while being fully protected and having that distance and playing with like distance and intimacy back and forth.
You being in latex or them?
Both. Yeah. Sometimes me, sometimes them, sometimes both.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. It's I dated a lot very casually before I found kink and BDSM, and it was like always just the default assumption that there would be penetrative sex. And there's honestly a deeper connection and intimacy I find when there's not. Like it's erotic and it's connective, and like even my shibari session last night, I was like, this is TMI, but I have a sex podcast. I don't know. I went to the bathroom and I was like, oh, I'm wet, like after this experience. But I wasn't inherently turned on in the moment.
Yeah.
But like the sensations and the safety, and we just have a beautiful connection. And it was great. Still integrating.
That. Did you? Yeah. Were there any videos of it, or was it just a private moment?
There were photos. Funny story. I have a film camera. I love film photography. And I actually think I'm going to take the handle Kink Film ATX if you ever want to take any photos.
Oh, yes, please. Absolutely.
Before you leave. So I love taking film photos. I brought my film camera, and after our session, when I was kind of like coming down, she was taking photos, and then I started telling her how to take photos on my film camera. I cannot even tell you what these shots would look like. So fucking gorgeous. I get home, no film in the camera. Forgot to put a roll in. So it's just like, I messaged her, and because a lot of our session, we were also talking about like some shame that I have. And so I've sent her a little voice note when I got home, and I was like, like I'm trying to not go into shame or embarrassment here because I really wanted to share these photos with you, but it'll just live in our minds forever.
I think that's really beautiful. Like the memory of it crystallizing. And I think when things are not documented, it kind of forces you to have to reflect and kind of polish the memory by remembering it, by journaling about it, by sharing it with people so that it lasts.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So when you were first exploring like messaging people anonymously, were you feeling more, have you always been more dominant? Or are you switchy, or were you more subby when you started? Or
I think I always need an element of being in control or empowered. So I explored the whole spectrum of it.
Yeah.
And I definitely am switchy, but it's not subbing. I think subbing is incredibly like intimate for me. So I only leave that for like a like lifestyle romantic partner.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be a serious partner.
Yeah.
But like power bottoming,
Tell me more about that, because I think I don't know if topping from the bottom is like that. Is that like a derogatory term? Like, does it kind of have that you're trying to be too controlling?
I think in the pro-dom space that has a derogatory connotation to it.
But power bottom is a little different.
I understand where they're coming from, though.
Yeah.
Like power bottoming is basically a pillow princess with a lot of requirements that they want met.
Yeah.
And I I'm okay working with people like that, actually.
Sure.
That kind of puts me in a space of being a service top, and I think I have a degree of flexibility where that can also be very fun.
Yeah.
And I don't mind it.
Yeah. What I've learned about myself is like somewhat similar. Like I feel now, like I was only submissive for a very long time in the bedroom. And then I realized a lot of that was conditioning, in terms of like people pleasing and wanting to please a man for validation. And I started leaning into more switchy stuff recently, and it was so empowering. Like it feels like one of the most exhilarating things like towards the patriarchy, to like switch this narrative of being submissive and not using my voice and like not sharing my true thoughts to a man. It's healing, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
to
I
lean
think,
into that.
yeah, a lot of people do find dominance to be a really great avenue of exploring, yeah, like having a voice in any kind of capacity.
I mean, I was the first time I sent a slightly dominant text to a man that we were playing around with some stuff with, I was like, what? Like, I felt scared. Like, it was
Interesting. Scared?
I was nervous to fuck it up, to be too dominant, to offend a man. Like, I don't know. It was just a lot of internalized shit coming up.
Yeah. I say let him be offended.
Working on it. And it was actually a really interesting lesson because his phone got stolen that night. And so I literally never heard from him again. Or until more recently. And I was like,
oh, he found you.
We reconnected. But I was like, I thought that I'd been too much and that he didn't want to talk to me anymore. But anyways, I have just found exploring both sides to be really healing. And I feel like I kind of have like a slightly different type for each, which is interesting. But so what inspired you to explore the pro-Dom world, and what did that journey look like?
Yeah, I think what happened was I was playing in a lifestyle capacity, and a lot of my...
As a Dom, like you were...
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of my subs just ended up gifting, right? Or tributing and offering things as sacrifice. And then I realized over time, really, that in terms of time allocation, I would, prioritize subs who give that extra effort, give that extra energy. And at a certain point, I just realized, I think this is, if I go pro, I can really set those boundaries and really like carve out my time in that way. And I also just really wanted to explore the world. I wanted to meet people that otherwise would never meet in a lifestyle capacity, right? I think there's a bit of like self-selection that happens when it's in a more dating space. And in the pro space, especially in the dungeon, when I was starting off, right, you would get same day calls. You would be in a dungeon, you'll have certain hours and certain slots for where you have to be there. And you just have to like think on your feet, work on your feet. Now that I'm independent, the structure is very different, right? I have an intake form. They schedule ahead of time. There's very specific slots for them, and they have to fit into my life. But when I was first starting, the randomness of like who would come through the door was what I wanted to experience.
Sure. So you would go to the dungeon for a certain amount of hours, like you had a shift, and then you would work with anybody that came in?
Yes, if they requested me. And different dungeons do it differently, but at the dungeon I was in, what would happen was they would call in. Usually people ask, oh, who's available right now with, in the next like hour or 2 hours. If they were a little bit more considerate, it would be several hours ahead of time. Yes.
Was there arousal with that? Like they were horny then and there and wanted to call and come in?
I think there was for me. Yeah. The fact that it's like, oh, they need it really bad right now.
Yes.
And that's also why, even though it's hard to fit in same day sessions for me, I still leave that as an option. It almost never happens anymore because people book sometimes months ahead of time. I have someone booked for January.
Fuck yes.
Yeah. But I like the tension of the needy, like, oh, I need a 2-day, please. And I have up charges for that now. But at the time, it was, you didn't really know like who you're going to get for the day. It's higher risk, but that's why it's in a dungeon setting, and I felt safer with other women around.
Was there somebody else in the room with you?
So the dungeon was in sort of like a house setting. So there's not another person in the room. It was set up so that a person could walk in. They would only be greeted by me, and there's a hallway, and then we go into like one of the like side rooms.
Yeah.
And
Sounds hot.
yeah, and and the other woman would be sort of like one or two rooms down to sort of like the left side, and that was the communal space.
Okay.
It reminds me a little bit of like strip clubs where there's a place where everyone gets ready
Right.
and sets up. We, after a session, you know, I would go back and we could gossip about the sub.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. Or, you know, if there's someone that seems difficult, we would all sort of talk about it together. We can like brainstorm a session. And it's really good for, I wanted to start in dungeon because I wanted to experience that mentorship
Yeah.
and being in community with
Yes,
other
the
women.
camaraderie.
Yeah, and
So
seeing
beautiful. how
how they work, figuring out my own style.
Yeah. What would you say your own style is comparatively?
I I'm I feel like I oscillate between a lot of different like modalities. I tend to be a more sensual dom.
Okay.
I like sadism. I really like anything that I can do to a sub where I can push their buttons and figure
Yeah.
out what ticks, what doesn't tick, what in which ways I can sort of gain the most power in that moment. And I want to also, you know, clarify that the majority of my subs, like 99, no, right now, 100% of them are men.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think
ask.
because of my look,
Uh-huh.
I would love to have like female and more queer clients, but 100% of them right now
Okay.
are men.
Are you
Yeah.
queer?
I'm bi, yeah, and I really love like the New York queer kinky scene. The overlap is almost 100%.
Sure. Okay. Well, she's taking applications
I
for
am
kinky
taking
women
applications,
subs.
please.
Yeah, something that I've explored, and most of my playing into my dom, more like mommy dom energy is what I would say I have.
Love a good mommy dog.
Yes, I'm like, I love nurturing, and something about it is I've explored it mostly with substantially younger men, like men in their early 20s, mid 20s. There's something about that like maternal nurturing energy as well as like assertive that just feels very natural for me.
You're so nice.
Like I don't really want to. I don't like inflicting pain. Like I'm not a sadist. I like receiving it. But where was I going with all this? I just got really excited thinking about all of these guys. But what I found is that like I really like orgasm control. So
hot.
and kind of like you were talking about the eagerness and the energy for a guy to be like, I need to see you today. I found that like guys get really like subby and needy and like I need this if there is orgasm control, and it's really fun.
I agree. That's the same reason why I like chastity and like long edging, gooning. You
What's
know,
gooning?
Gooning is when a guy. This is like a new
Milking?
internet term that came up.
Okay.
A gooning is like usually when a guy watches like porn for a very long time and they get into like, it's called goon space. Like no
Interesting.
thoughts, just horny.
Okay.
Ferociously horny.
Yeah.
And like
Not letting them come.
Not letting them come, like, and they would like goon away. That's the term. Edge for a long time, they'll goon for a long time.
What's goon away?
Like it's just like gooning away is just like
Blue
they're losing brain cells doing it. Like horny to the point where they're losing brain cells.
Yeah. I mean, when I had a very experienced dom and I was submissive, and when I've played with men and they've been submissive, it's like it's hard to articulate and explain to people watching or listening that haven't experienced it, because there is so much for me like relief and surrender and like this just beautiful subspace of presence. And then on the other side, with being more dominant, it's like I feel like this mentor in a way. So like I've been, you know, pretty kinky and slutty for a long time, and it's like to be able to connect with these younger guys and like teach them or like give them the best blowjob they've ever had, or like do these things and kind of rock their world and teach them how to be a good dom or a good sub. It's just fun. I'm
Yeah.
getting all warm and flush.
Oh. It sounds like this has a very spiritual component for you that you really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I've never thought about it that way, but yes. Yeah, I mean, I really struggle with being present. I have what I would say is pretty severe ADHD, and something about putting the phone away, putting all the devices away, and like really being present with somebody, whichever space I'm holding, is really just feels so refreshing for me in a world of a lot of distraction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever have anything? Did you ever have unpleasant experiences at the dungeon when things weren't as, I guess, when the people weren't audited or vetted as much?
Yeah. We would try to vet people as much as possible.
Does that include ID, like sending in somebody's ID?
Yeah, some people would not send ID though.
What if it makes it out to the?
Yeah, they always worry about that, even though like it never happens. It's always more dangerous on the workers' end. I unpleasant experiences. I think
If you're comfortable.
Yeah, I think when I was starting off and I was learning how to navigate different types of people and different types of kinks and how they all interact, I don't think it was uncomfortable in the sense that like my boundaries were ever crossed because I've always been pretty like certain about like what I want to do and what I don't want to do. But it would get really difficult sometimes when the act of play becomes more significant than just play, right? Like they're using that space as an extension of something that they're going through in life. And that level of emotional labor, when I was just starting off, the learning curve for it was very high.
Sure. For also like not internalizing all of those things that people are processing, or
I don't know if I internalized any of it, but just knowing how, like, what to say, you know, how to act. Am I supposed to? Should I be warmer now? Should I be colder now? You know, and it's really I had to like get really good at reading someone within the first like 5 to 10 minutes of them being in the room, and knowing. And also understanding that sometimes the things as they say that they want is not what they want. They think they want this, but they want something else, or they think they want this and they're not ready for it. All of that sort of intuitive, like emotional assessment was a big learning curve. Especially when prior to that, I did interact with people on this kind of basis, in this capacity and at a higher volume too. Like having to go into an intense situation and then learn how to decompress fast for the next person and like over and over and over. That was, I think, probably the hardest part of the work when I was starting.
Sure. That was very well said. Today's episode of Sex Talk Radio is sponsored by the HUD app. HUD offers an alternative approach to commitment-free dating and is geared towards supporting women in exploring their sexuality and intimacy in a safe way through conversations around consent, healthy communication, and boundary setting. HUD was the first to roll out safety features like auto blur photos and video chat capabilities. I've been using the app for a little while now, and personally, my favorite feature is the bedroom feature, where I can see a glimpse into somebody's bedroom desires. So for example, it will literally say Thea's bedroom, and then BDSM, bondage, dirty talk, impact play, etc., which makes it that much easier to assess your sexual compatibility with someone. HUD is really future forward in how they're evolving their app, and I'm excited to continue using it for casual dating. Go to hudapp.com/sextalk, that's HUDAPP.com/SEGGS talk for a week on me. A quick note, the HUD app is available for both iOS and Android and is available to users over 18. And I think that I've heard other professionals say like, yeah, you end up knowing somebody much better than they do in that capacity, especially if they're newer to working with a sex worker or with a pro-dom. Like it's you're the one that has all the experience of uncovering the things.
I like to keep in mind, and part of the reason why I don't internalize what happens, When I get into longer DS relationships or longer dom sub interactions with subs, then when some of these interpersonal things come into play, then that gets a little bit more like I may see as a reflection of myself in some ways. But when I was starting off, I didn't internalize a lot because I very quickly realized for a lot of these subs, when they're like reaching for me, they're sometimes not reaching for me. They're reaching for sometimes an ex-girlfriend or a door or like a window or like a bottle, or they're reaching for themselves. They just want me to be an extension of themselves, or they're reaching for their mother or their father. I become sort of a vessel that has to become really good at that sort of representation. And so it's not internalized because it's
Sure.
you're a
able
facet.
to.
I'm like dialing up a facet. I have to learn how to emotionally isolate certain feelings that they're having, dial it up, dial it down, play around with it, twist it, turn it upside down, put them back together.
Lots of metaphors. So you're saying you're able to kind of keep these emotional and energetic boundaries because you know that what's happening is like an extension of something else potentially, or a processing of something else.
Yeah, it sometimes is. And other times it's, when they have, it really depends person on person, but a lot of times, yeah, that is what it is.
Yeah. So what kind of conversations do you have, like if somebody's first time working with a pro-dom? Like, do you talk about what to expect? And maybe you could just share with the viewers and listeners, because I think I have a decent understanding of what might happen, but other people might not know. They might think there's sex, like they don't. Yeah, would love you to kind of set the
absolutely. So if you are going to a dungeon, usually there's a dungeon website. You'll see a list of DOMs there, and sometimes there's a schedule for shifts. If there's no schedule for shifts and you want to see a specific person, you can call in and see when that person is available. If you don't really care who you're seeing, you just care more about a skill set they have. If you want to do bondage or pegging or complicated medical play, usually they have a list of fetishes and kinks that they're interested in and provide.
Cool.
And if there's not that, also call in and ask who's good at this, who's experienced at this, and use your judgment to gauge if they actually have experience with it, especially if it's higher risk play. Deposit if the dungeon requires a deposit. And deposit if the dungeon requires a deposit.
Could you could you talk about the financial element? Like how much was a session at the dungeon and stuff?
Yes. So when I was starting at the dungeon, it was $250 an hour.
Okay.
And it would scale depending on different fetishes. So easier fetishes I think would be $250. If it's more complicated or there's a complicated wardrobe request, there's usually upcharges to $50 to $100. And this was at the dungeon.
For an hour?
For an hour, yeah. And at the dungeon too, they gave a discount for 2 hours for some reason at the place where I was working at.
Stick around.
Yeah. Tips are really important in dungeons because dungeons take a big cut. When I was starting out, they took a 60% cut.
Wow.
Yeah.
So an hour of your time would only be like 100 and...
Yeah, which was at the time way better than anything I've, could dream of.
Vanilla job.
Yeah, way better than any vanilla job. Yeah, absolutely. But it's still a big cut, and I would always really appreciate the subs who understood that and would tip to make sure like this is your money.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if the dungeon requires a deposit, make sure you send in a deposit to confirm a time and slot. If they don't require a deposit, then, come with cash ready and make sure that you are clean. So you're washed, make sure that it's like a good experience for the person. Like don't come sweaty after the gym unless that's part of the session.
Are there notes of this like in like a confirmation email or like, I mean, I feel like people just really don't know a lot of basic
Yeah, now for my for my assistant sends out confirmation emails detailing like what I'm looking for and what I want.
Cool.
At the dungeon though, at the time there wasn't any confirmation emails.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just hopefully you shower.
yeah, and there's a shower in the dungeon too.
Oh,
so
cool.
if the dom tells you to shower, make sure
Hey,
you
there you go.
shower. It's because
You're a stinky boy. Go
yeah,
shower.
just not pleasant. Not pleasant.
Oh my gosh.
When you arrive, you know, pay upfront instead of waiting until the very end.
Sure.
It's a lot easier if she doesn't ask, right? It kind of ruins the mood if she has to like ask for a payment and then have to like count it in front of you, whatever like that.
Yes.
I think that kind of like takes you away from the moment.
Sure.
Make sure it's accurate. Make sure, you know, you give it ahead of time. If you want her to be in a good mood, you can bring a gift of some kind, butter it up. Always nice to receive gifts. And when the time is up, you just leave, say thank you, be very polite, and head on your way. Yeah. Don't overlinger. Some people overlinger, and
attachment can really be formed with dom sub dynamics. Like
Yes.
an attachment can be formed where it's hard to say bye or
yeah, absolutely. If you want an extension, just be very upfront about the extension instead of overlingering and then the dom having to bring up, oh, do you want an extension? And then having to negotiate that potentially is also, it just takes,
especially when someone's in kind of an altered space or kind of a subspace.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the dungeon format.
Okay.
For independents like me, there's ad sites where we sometimes are on. I'm not on any ad sites right now. I'm just on Twitter. That's where I primarily am. And I think I have a good stable of subs right now where I don't need to advertise that hard. We have a website, you know, make sure the website is legitimate, make sure that she's in community so you don't get scammed. Just use your discernment about that. Do your research. If she has interviews, you know, read her interviews, watch her interviews. But don't do that so much so that it makes the initial interaction awkward because there's nothing to talk about. Like it's too one-sided. The information gap is too one-sided.
Oh, interesting.
Do the intake form properly. Send the deposit up front. And for independents, we, you know, depending on if we have an assistant and our time and schedule, we can probably, you know, fit you in within the next 2 weeks or so, depending on the schedule.
So you said your stable of subs. Are they all paying? Do you have any subs that you are not doing paid work with?
No, they're all paying. Even in the lifestyle capacity,
lifestyle.
I think they understand that right now, in order for me to make my time worthwhile, it's going to be, you know, there some form of compensation is important. And to be honest, I have a lot of wonderful subs who are paying.
Totally.
And it's sort of like this feeling of why would I go back to doing this for free when I can get everything I want and some more.
Yeah. I am curious about, I haven't thought too much about it, but in this specific moment, I'm like, I would like to monetize this because it's a lot of emotional labor and communication. And I find that with like the nurturing mommy dom, like I like to talk to these guys every day. But yes, being paid would be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, if you're a mommy dom to them, you know, there's ways to play around with the financial aspect.
Sure.
Like a little lemonade stand. Like the little boy needs to like do whatever for you, right? Like earn some.
Well, so for my mommy dom, there's not necessarily like age play.
Okay.
Really, it's just more of like the nurturing energy, I guess. Like daddy doms I've had. Like with daddy doms I've had, there hasn't been an age play necessarily. But yeah. But I think that there's ways that I could do it that would feel better than like this amount of money for this amount of time. Like, you know, I like gifts, but yeah, I'll definitely think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some other DOMs where, you know, there's packages for people, and
I'll just price it out like my business coaching packages. 1 month with me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or where you can say something like a attributed amount that you feel like accurately represents what I mean in your life.
Wow.
Right?
That's beautiful. And I like the word tribute. That feels good.
Yeah, like work within your limits or your finances. And I just want to know that you value me in this way. And this is what, and also letting them know this is what you're supporting. You're supporting this podcast. You're supporting this meal I'm going to have. You're supporting this night out with friends, right? Having like really specific things that they're contributing to your life.
And it makes it so much more human and connected than for this amount of time or pay per meet or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, time to go back to the drawing board. I'm taking a little bit of a hiatus from all the dating at the moment, but so when you're talking to a new sub, and let's say they're not super experienced, would you have a conversation about safe words and like what to expect? And if you feel this way, let's talk, or how to pause a scene, that kind of stuff?
If they're new, they're inexperienced, in general, my first sessions with subs is it tends to be on the gentler side because I know how intense I can get. So lots of talking, safe words, negotiating, like what that looks like. I, review their kinks and fetishes and the psychological headspace. I talk to them a little bit, get to know where they're coming from, who they are, what they like to do for fun, things like that, and establish some level of like emotional comfort, and then we can jump into the scene and dive into it and then dive out of it.
Yeah, you can go farther when there's that human connection and that trust built up.
Yeah, and it feels better for me. I think the time and place for that sort of dungeon setting of like people, the anonymous people coming in and out was really exciting. It was really fun. Right now, the place I'm at is having a level of connectedness with certain subs. Not all of them. Some of them, I'm like, I don't want to be connected to. You're just a piece of meat, and we know this, and we've established this, and that's it.
How many of your subs are in person versus do you have digital relationships?
Yes, I have digital subs too. So I'm expanding my digital persona, my digital self a lot more nowadays.
Yeah.
And so I have an OnlyFans, I have a Loyal Fans. And on my OnlyFans, there's quite an overlap actually between digital subs and in person. A lot of them have seen me in person and want to keep connected and play a little bit online. So they're on my OnlyFans to do so. And I have some guys who are just, digital only. I don't think they want to break into the in-person real space. They want to keep it as a fantasy. And that's a lot of, fun fodder for me to play around with too. Yeah.
When we chatted, go ahead.
I also want to mention, if you see DOMs in person and they also have a digital site, do not talk about in-person things on their digital sites. It will get us banned and it will get us deplatformed. So please.
Sites. Oh, you mean on like Instagram? Or
on Instagram, on Twitter, on OnlyFans. Even on OnlyFans, don't talk about sessions. Don't talk about anything in person.
I see what you're saying. Okay,
yeah, keep it digital only.
Yes. Because, and I've been doing a lot of research lately on the regs of all of these platforms because I'm interested in getting into the space and like the sex tech space. And OnlyFans is like this very tedious safe haven of like how everything is done. So if you're insinuating, hey, you paid me $500 for that session in person, that becomes prostitution, and it's.
It depends on your state and sometimes the borough. So in New York, Manhattan is partially decriminalized, but Queens is not.
Oh, partially decriminalized for sex work?
Yes, for all forms of sex work.
So nobody could get arrested.
Well, it's partially decriminalized, so it's functioning under the Nordic model, which means right now, if you're doing in-person work, clients could be prosecuted, but the worker would not be.
Look at and those tables flipped.
And this is the DA was vocal about their stance on that. Although it sounds good in theory, but if you criminalize everything around the sex worker, you're de facto criminalizing the sex worker themselves, right? And while that seems like a step forward, I think it's really important to make sure that the ways we screen is also protected, right? So if clients are continue to be criminalized, there's a less likelihood they're willing to send IDs for screening, jobs for screening, and provide that, because now we kind of have the upper hand in outing them in ways where we can't be held accountable for. So I think full decriminalization is
definitely
necessary for any sort of safe path forward.
Definitely. I agree. What's the logic of the client could be persecuted,
Yeah,
but
on
not
I
the
think on the legal and policy end, a lot of the lawmakers who push for the Nordic model have not had experience in the industry. So in their minds, right, oftentimes clients are aggressive and unsafe, and they see clients oftentimes as usually like bad men or even pimps that are exploiting women, which they exist, right?
right.
But that is a minority in my experience, and those types of cases, it's closer to trafficking than sex work. It's, you know,
Right.
yeah.
So, but it wouldn't be that a man could get, or the client could get persecuted for if they do something aggressive or illegal. They could just be, or they could be arrested for just having been a client,
Yes.
which totally makes it. Why would they ever want to send in an ID or
Yes.
verify, which is actually the pathway to making it safe for a sex worker?
Yeah, the term is
Ugh.
soliciting prostitution.
Okay.
That's what they would be criminalized under.
It's just so backwards. Like I've been seeing. So do you take IDs or do you have your assistant take IDs?
For ID verification, I look at all of those myself when they're sent in.
Okay.
For people who don't want to send it in, you know, I require a digital consultation so that they can at least like flash your ID or show it to me. If there's some, to be honest, like there's been cases where like they absolutely can't send ID, and then once I got to know them, I could understand why, but they went through other forms of verification, like work, or we went on a consultation, and they're like, I really can't have any footprint. We can sign like some legal forms to make sure there's an NDA, whatever, and that's just, you know, make sure it's fully anonymous.
But if they have like a big job or they're kind of closeted or whatever it might be, like, yeah, it puts them in a really tricky spot of wanting you to feel safe, but not wanting to be potentially arrested or outed, or there's a lot there.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to find workers who are ethical in what they do. You know, that they won't blackmail you or film the session or do anything that jeopardizes your life.
Yeah.
And you know, have discernment on who you meet, and that's what consultations are for, to make sure there's chemistry and that it's safe and you can talk about all of that.
I had someone tell me they had a blackmail fetish over an app, and I was like, I don't know, I'm not qualified to handle this.
I love blackmail fetishes though.
I'll pass them along to you, because my inner good girl can't handle
you
that.
You are such a good girl. You're very wholesome.
Wholesome mommy. That's the goal. Wholesome and not, but when I was messaging with this person, I was like, I would love a big chunk of money, but like I just don't know how to navigate. It's like, it feels like an advanced kink. It feels like there are some kinks that are just like, you gotta practice.
Yeah, you can dip your toes into it.
Yeah,
see how I feel.
Yeah. So you mentioned Berlin earlier. I'd love to talk about that. I did not know about the club that you mentioned specifically, but I do have some friends that went that literally had like their minds blown by some of the sex clubs that they went to, and they like extended their trip. And now I really want to go. I want to make it like a work trip. Like I want to interview people and like go to sex clubs in the red light district. And well, that would be in Amsterdam, but they have one in Berlin, I'm assuming, as well.
I've never been to the one in Berlin. I know that sex work is licensed there, right? I believe so.
I think so.
Yeah.
In Berlin or in
Berlin.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Berghain was a lot of fun when I went last year.
Yes. Tell us more.
Backstory
here.
Last year in October, I was in Berlin for the closing of like one of the biggest and oldest dungeons in
the closing.
Yeah, the closing in Germany. Oh. So
sad or no?
It was sad, but it was a beautiful party and play party that night. I think the woman who was running it just didn't want to maintain that space anymore.
Okay.
So this dungeon was a like manor by the lake, and so they also owned the lake.
Whoa.
And you could do like drowning sessions, but you can kayak people out. and like do a little drowning or kidnapping or whatever. There's an outside stable, and then you can bring horses in. And inside there's space for subs to stay overnight, or for you to stay overnight. There's a kitchen, there's a medical room, a classroom, and a really big like play living space area.
A lot of different scenes and like environments.
But the best part is they have an underground prison system that is like fully soundproof, and it was a little bit of a fire hazard too, to be honest. There's like very low ceilings, you know. There's like some wires. It added to the ambiance.
Sure.
There's prison cells on the side, and my favorite part was they had a sensory deprivation. Not a room. It was just on the ground. There's like a trap door. You open it and it's fully pitch black.
Whoa.
The only thing in the sensory depth room is a emergency button for you to get out.
Holy
like
shit.
That's the only thing in there, and you can just be stuck there, trapped there.
Whoa.
And yeah.
But you weren't able to do any sessions there because you went for the closing.
It was a play party, so there was a few doms that brought their subs or personal subs, and so I did play a little bit. Mistress, what's her full name? Mistress Firewolf was there with her German sub, and I did a little whipping underground, and I also bottomed for Empress Wu that night too.
Okay, I don't know who some of these people are.
Empress Wu is a wonderful dom in New York, so I allowed myself to bottom for her that night. It was really beautiful.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, I would really like to go there. I mean, I think one of the main questions that I get from people is like, how do I meet these people, get into these spaces, get into these scenes when I have no foot in the door? Because I feel like many of these parties are invite only. And I mean, my advice is to just kind of start somewhere. Go on a date with somebody from Field that has more experience than you. Go to a munch from FetLife. But like, what would your advice be?
I think the easiest way would probably be going to a public party. Like there's Torture Garden. You can just buy tickets to.
And
right?
Where's that?
They host Torture Garden in London, LA, New York, and also in Berlin too.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big fetish party. I think there's always some kind of local munches happening in cities that sometimes on FetLife that you can see. Following DOMs on our social media so that you're up to date on the most, upcoming party that might be public for you is, pretty cool. And if you have the means to, you can just hire a dom to do a social outing, just to talk for an hour or like go for a meal for tea time.
That's a good idea.
And just, pick her brain.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So you mentioned at one point that you were more anonymous in this part of your life until recently. Could you share what that means and what that transition was?
Yeah, so when I was working in the dungeon I started November 2019, and then COVID happened in 2020. I was face in the entire time. I was face in, so that means I blurred my face.
On like the dungeon website?
On the dungeon website, everywhere.
But you had the social presence as well with a blurred face?
With a blurred face. Yeah, I just had a censored face. On social.
That kind of makes it more exciting for some subs, I'm sure.
For some subs, yes, and for other subs, they don't know if they want to commit to a person they might not, be attracted to after the face reveal. And I didn't go face out until last year.
Okay.
Because I wanted to do more digital work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was you were doing in-person work, and what kind of social media photos did you have? Like were you making OnlyFans content without your face or not?
No, I was only in person. I never expected to go digital. Okay. I only really thought about it in 2020, and
when the world shut down.
In 2020 I started thinking about it and wanting to do more of it. But I was facing my day job at the time. It wasn't at a place where I felt secure enough to be face out yet, and now I'm at a place where it wouldn't be jeopardized at all. Yeah.
Very cool. Were you nervous to do that, or?
I knew that I was going to do it. I think if I was nervous about it, it would have been that I was not ready for it yet. And
Amen.
when I remember I was taking a class by Alexandra Snow, and she was talking about digital content back in 2020. And I asked, this was before Alex and I were friends. I asked a question. I was like, is it possible to make digital content face in? And she said, and this is a little bit provocative, she said, if you're not ready to be faced out as a sex worker, you probably are not ready to be like a sex worker.
Sure.
You know, because
Yeah,
that shows a degree of like fear of being stigmatized that you're not ready for, but you're already you are going to experience it, right. And so you have to sort of go all the way. And that like when she said that, that really stuck with me, and it really challenged why I was facing. You know, what kind of things do I feel are going to be put in jeopardy? You know, it really made me think about the importance of being out as a sex worker and be able to be someone that can feel secure in the work that I'm doing and
Definitely.
who I am in this identity. So I think last year I was ready to do it.
Cool. Have you come up against anything with family or relatives or friends?
Everyone who I care about and who is close and important to me knows what I do.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was also a slow sort of progression there too.
Yeah.
I like in 2020, there was like a small group, and it just kind of, you know, got bigger and bigger. And I want to like try to normalize that as much as possible. Definitely. That like we're part of your community, and there's sex workers in everyone's lives. Just not everyone talks about it.
Definitely. Yeah, it's it can be challenging. I've explored or experienced a bit of that recently with a family member. Just I think it brings up a lot of stuff. It can bring up a lot of their own stuff, their own baggage and their own stuff around sex.
Yeah.
And also worry, concern for your child or relative. But you know, what we're doing is super important.
Yeah. And I understand where they're coming from and that fear and concern. I think sex work wasn't this. I think the current iteration, there's still issues around safety for sex work, but I think it's becoming a lot more manageable. It has become a lot safer. And I think for the older generation, when they think about sex work, they're really thinking about very dangerous situations. And like, of course, if that's your only
reference point.
Yeah, reference point.
Or movies where, yeah.
Like, of course you would be terrified.
Sure.
Yeah.
I would love for you to share like a favorite scene of yours or a favorite kink of yours that you like playing with. I think that people that are newer and experienced would love to hear a bit more detail on like a scene or what happens in a dungeon room or a scene.
My favorite scenes they tend to be quite extreme.
I want to hear them.
Okay.
I'm not scared.
Yeah.
It might seem nice, but don't worry.
Oh. I have so many scenes that are favorite scenes. And not all of them have to be complicated. I think sometimes like the session I just came from.
Yes.
A very simple foot worship for someone who's never done it in their life before is like very delicious.
That's exciting. This was in person?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
This morning. Yeah.
Okay.
And he drove 2.5 hours to come see me. Yeah.
And did he come to, where did you guys have the session?
We sessioned at my hotel.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does that look like? What does foot worship look like?
Well, he's been one of my digital subs for a long time.
Okay.
And
everybody's excited to meet you.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually thought he would never jump to the in-person space. He seemed very comfortable just being online and getting his needs met online.
Online via communicating on OnlyFans, or?
We actually primarily use Sex Panther.
Okay.
Yeah, he preferred that platform more, and
Dasha just told me about that.
Yeah, I don't open my lines on Sex Panther as often, and I want to do at least once a month, but every time I open it, it's just it turns into like a 12-hour day because it's nonstop.
Yeah.
I need to figure out how I need to open my lines a little bit better.
Interesting.
But I think I've interacted with him for like a year.
Okay.
And this is the first time meeting.
Yeah.
And he didn't, in the intake form, he didn't talk too much about his personal experiences. So when we started, I, wanted to get a sense of his experience level, all of that. And he's never done in-person co-worship before. So we just had a really lovely time with him.
And you're dominant in that that dynamic?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a pro-dom, I am dominant in all my dynamics, and I prefer it that way.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun for me.
Yeah, definitely. And in a session like this, is there touching of genitals? Is there orgasm? Like, I think that people just have no idea. I've heard just very different things from different doms.
Yeah, I think every single dom has different boundaries and lines of what they provide. If you have questions about it, you should just ask the dom what they're comfortable with. Some doms have very little physical interaction. Like, they don't really want any
I think
sort
that's
of like.
what I've heard is that in general in these scenes, they are not nude. There is not sex, and there's generally not orgasm even necessarily. I don't know.
Yes, a lot of doms do operate that way. I'm on the more sensual side, so I'm comfortable with more like physical interactions with subs. There's also, for other doms, they provide like kinky escort experiences. So for kinky escorts, they do full service.
Gotcha.
But it depends on, every individual. And if you're not sure, you should just ask if that's something that they provide, and just do it very politely. And I would suggest doing a consultation to ask about that, because online sometimes, we're not sure if it's law enforcement or, this is like a blackmail situation. It's always good to just ask in person or, via consultation in some way.
Wow. You navigate a lot as a pro dom.
It is a lot to kind of like whittle around.
Yes.
And for me, my level of physical interaction really depends on the chemistry. Okay. So I tell them, like, it really depends on if I like you enough.
And you get to be empowered in that
exactly.
energy of, I could see myself doing this.
Yeah, and I also, the way I play is very personal. So I always let the subs know that, like, if I can feel very comfortable being a lot more physical in one session, and then the next, I don't want to do any of that. So get in the sleep sack, and I'm going to suspend you, or like just somewhere far away. And if that's not the headspace that they're in for that kind of play, I'm like, okay, then we can delay it for another month. But right now, I kind of only want to do XYZ, and if you're lucky enough to fit into what I want to explore in that moment and how I want to experience pleasure, then how fortunate of you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's something really beautiful in what you just said about, like, I hope that women listening or watching are thinking about how much power it could bring to their lives to have this attitude in the bedroom sometimes.
Yeah.
There can be situations for, I think, a lot of women where they would like to pause or stop or shift, but it's more of, we'll just let it keep going, or it's almost over anyways. Like, and I just think what you just shared could really be taken and used as a way for women to really self-advocate for themselves in the bedroom. And if you're not in the mood, you're not in the mood,
Yeah. And I think you would be surprised by how many men, if they're sort of emotionally intelligent, they're okay with that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
They're not going to take it as rejection.
The programming is very much people pleasing, but they're strong enough. They'll be fine. They'll survive. They can jack off in a corner if they really have to.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate our chat today. I would love for you to share a bit of wisdom to maybe a young kinkster or teenage kinkster about what they can, not what they can expect in their journey, but maybe the beauty it's brought to your life, and also maybe the beauty that being a dom has brought to your life.
Yeah, if you are a young kinkster, depending on, you know, where your interests fall, if you're a dominant woman and you know that about yourself, I think it's really important to sit with that, understand what your needs are, what brings you pleasure, what doesn't bring you pleasure, and hold fast to it. Hold fast to like that core part of you that makes you you. And know that you'll attract the right people in your life who love you and worship you and, you know, feel so lucky to be in your presence. You don't have to settle for less. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a dominant woman, but just really any sort of like female presenting individual. Yeah. And you can live a life that is beyond your wildest imagination when you hold fast to what makes you valuable and what you value in people in the world and seeking that out. And an important part of that is knowing how to say no, and knowing that when you're saying no, all that is passing that person on in their interest to someone who will fit them better. Yeah, just holding fast to that.
Yes, not trying to accommodate everyone.
No.
Yeah. Where can people find you and stay in touch in the world?
Yeah, so I am expanding my digital work a lot more. I'm on Instagram, mxtomie.digital, and on Twitter, mxtomie_digital.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yay.
Thank you so much for tuning into Sex Talk Radio. I hope you found this conversation to be expansive and fun. Please come connect with me on Instagram at Sex Talk Radio Podcast. That is spelled SEGGS. And I would love to see you inside of the Sexy Society, which is an online community for kink and sex positive women. Thank you so much.